There comes a moment in everyone's life when the noise finally settles, the excuses lose their power, and the truth becomes impossible to ignore. It doesn't happen with fireworks or some dramatic revelation. It happens quietly, almost silently, like a whisper in the back of your mind saying, this is not the life you were meant to live. That's the awakening. That's the first stage. And it's not about changing your life in that moment. It's about finally seeing it clearly for the first time. You start to realize that the things you've been blaming, the circumstances you've been repeating, the patterns you've been stuck in, they're not chains holding you down. They're choices. Hard choices, maybe unconscious choices, maybe inherited choices, but choices nonetheless. And when that hits you, when you feel that truth land inside you, something shifts. You stop looking outward for a rescue and start looking inward for responsibility. Not blame, responsibility. There's a difference. Blame punishes the past. Responsibility empowers the future. And in that awakening, there's usually discomfort. A kind of internal tension where the life you're living doesn't match the life you know you're capable of. You feel it in your chest. You feel it in your gut. That restless energy that keeps you up at night. The voice that keeps saying, you're meant for more. It's uncomfortable for a reason. Growth always begins with discomfort because comfort doesn't demand change. What makes this stage so important is that it's honest. Brutally honest. You can't move forward until you admit where you really are. And most people avoid this part because it requires facing things they've spent their whole lives trying to outrun. Their habits, their fears, their wounds, their excuses, their limitations. But here's the truth. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. The awakening stage doesn't ask you to fix everything. It just asks you to see everything. And once you see it, once you finally understand that your life isn't going to magically shift just because you want it to, that's when the real power shows up. Because the moment you realize life won't change until you do, that's the moment everything becomes possible. That's when the door opens. That's when your potential stops being a fantasy and starts becoming a responsibility. You begin to understand that no one is coming to save you. And strangely, that realization isn't depressing, it's liberating. Because it means you're not waiting anymore. You're not depending on luck, timing, or someone else's permission. You're not stuck in the story you were handed. For the first time, you feel the weight of your own power. And that power doesn't shout. It doesn't force. It just tells the truth. This is where the journey begins. Not with action, but with awareness. Not with movement, but with clarity. Not with changing your environment, but with changing your perspective. Because the moment you wake up to who you really are and where you really stand, is the moment the path forward becomes undeniable. You know, the second stage of life that shapes everything we become is the moment we step into resistance. Not the kind that pushes us back, but the kind that pushes us forward. It's that space where life stops letting you coast and starts demanding that you engage, that you rise, that you stretch into the person you were meant to be. Most people misunderstand this stage. They think resistance means something is wrong. They think discomfort means they're off track. But what if the opposite is true? What if resistance is the universe saying, you're ready? Think back to the moments in your life where you felt tested. Maybe it was losing a job. Maybe it was someone doubting you. Maybe it was waking up one morning realizing that the way things were could not be the way things continue. Those moments are not setbacks. They're the friction that sharpens you. Without resistance, there is no growth. Without friction, there is no fire. And without pressure, the diamond never forms. The real question isn't whether you'll face resistance. The real question is, what will you choose to become because of it? When you hit that wall, when the path suddenly stops being smooth, that's where your identity starts to shift. You begin discovering what you're actually made of. You learn what matters to you, what you're willing to fight for, what you're willing to endure. And you start seeing a different version of yourself, one that is stronger, more certain, more capable than you ever imagined. Sometimes people say, why does this keep happening to me? But the better question is, why does this keep happening for me? Because life doesn't give you resistance to block you. It gives you resistance to build you. And when you lean into that stage with full presence, something incredible happens. You stop running from challenges. You stop negotiating with your limitations. You stop waiting for permission. Instead, you look at the pressure and say, bring it. Because now you understand that the pain you're experiencing is simply the tension between who you were and who you're becoming. And that tension is sacred. That struggle is transformative. Every breakthrough you've ever had came after resistance. Every moment you look back on with pride came after a moment where you weren't sure you could keep going. And yet, you did. That's the proof. That's the evidence. That's the reminder that resistance is not there to defeat you. It's there to awaken you. It's there to activate the strength that's been dormant inside you. It's there to remind you that you are built for far more than comfort. And if you can embrace this stage, if you can welcome resistance instead of fearing it, your entire life begins to shift. Suddenly, challenges become opportunities. Pressure becomes fuel. Uncertainty becomes the space where your greatest potential starts to breathe. Because the truth is, you don't grow when life is easy. You grow when life invites you to rise. And in that moment, everything begins to change. There's a moment in life when the world stops being the problem and you realize the real battle is happening inside you. This is the stage where you're no longer blaming circumstances, no longer pointing at your past, no longer waiting for someone to come along and change things for you. This is the stage where you face yourself, your patterns, your doubts, your excuses, your hidden fears you've carried for years without even realizing it. And it's uncomfortable. It's messy. It's humbling. But it's also one of the most powerful stages of transformation because nothing in your outer world shifts until something in your inner world does. We all reach a point where we feel stuck, not because life has stopped moving, but because we stopped moving. Maybe you've been carrying beliefs that were never yours. Maybe someone told you who you were supposed to be, and without noticing, you accepted it as truth. Maybe you've been replaying an old story in your mind, one that was written in a painful chapter but doesn't match who you are anymore. This stage is about turning inward and asking the hard questions. What story am I living? And who told me I had to keep living it? This is the stage where you begin to break patterns instead of repeating them. You start noticing the small impulses that used to control you, the urge to give up, the instinct to play small, the temptation to avoid discomfort. And the moment you recognize those patterns, they lose power. You finally see them for what they are: old programming, just habits, just conditioning, not destiny. And then something shifts. You begin to realize that every emotion you feel is a signal, not a sentence. Fear isn't a wall, it's a doorway. Stress isn't a cage, it's a compass. Doubt isn't a sign to stop, it's a sign that you've reached the edge of the familiar. And edges are where growth actually begins. The truth is, you can't control everything around you, but you can always choose the meaning you give it. You can choose whether a challenge becomes a burden or a breakthrough. You can choose whether a setback becomes a reason to quit or a reason to rise. The moment you take ownership of your meanings, you take ownership of your life. And once you see that power in yourself, once you see that you're not just reacting to life, but shaping it, everything changes. Confidence shifts from something you wish you had to something you build. Strength shifts from something you admire in others to something you ignite in yourself. And the world begins to respond differently because you are showing up differently. This is the stage where you stop fighting life and start leading it. This is where transformation stops being an idea and becomes a decision. Because the moment you change within, life has no choice but to change around you. And that's when the real growth begins. There comes a time in your journey when you realize that growth isn't just about breaking patterns or understanding yourself. It's about stepping fully into the unknown and allowing life to stretch you in ways you never expected. This stage is where life tests what you've learned. It challenges your commitment. It pushes you into situations where the old version of you simply cannot survive. And even though it can feel overwhelming, this is the stage where you're being prepared for the very things you once prayed for. You start waking up to the truth that every level of life demands a different version of you. The mindset that helped you survive won't be the one that helps you thrive. The habits that kept you safe won't be the ones that help you expand. And the identity you've held on to, sometimes for years, has to be released so that something greater can emerge. Growth is never comfortable because it's literally the process of shedding what's familiar. And this stage has a funny way of showing up at the exact moment you think you're ready to settle. Just when you start feeling confident, life places a new challenge in front of you. One that forces you to stretch wider, dig deeper, and show up stronger. Not because life is trying to break you, but because it's trying to refine you. There's a difference. Breaking leaves you in pieces. Refining removes what no longer belongs so your true strength can shine. What's wild is that most people misread this stage. They think the pressure means something is wrong. They think the struggle is a sign to stop. They think the resistance means they're going backwards. But pressure is the proof of growth. Resistance is the signal of expansion. And struggle is the birthplace of strength. Nothing meaningful in life grows without friction, and that includes you. There will be moments where the path ahead feels unclear, where the step you're about to take feels like it's suspended in midair. But this is where trust takes over. Not the kind of trust that waits for guarantees, but the trust that acts without them. Because you know deep down that staying where you are would cost you more than stepping forward ever will. And you begin to realize something powerful. The discomfort you feel is not a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're evolving. The confusion is not chaos. It's the old and new versions of you colliding. And the fear isn't a warning. It's a message that you're on the edge of becoming someone you've never been. This stage doesn't just build your strength, it reveals it. It doesn't give you confidence. It uncovers the confidence that was buried beneath old limits. And once you've moved through this stage, you look back and realize that the very things you thought were obstacles were actually invitations to rise. Because growth doesn't happen when life is easy. Growth happens when life demands more of you, and you answer. There's a point you reach in life where everything starts to come together. Your struggles, your lessons, your breakthroughs, your growth. And suddenly you realize that every moment was preparing you for responsibility. Not the kind of responsibility that weighs you down, but the kind that lifts you up, the kind that makes you feel alive because you finally understand what your life is capable of creating. This is the stage where you stop waiting for change and start becoming the force that creates it. You begin to understand that your life isn't defined by what happens to you, but by what you decide to do with what happens to you. And the moment that understanding becomes real, everything shifts. You no longer wake up hoping for a good day, you start shaping one. You no longer wait for opportunities, you start building them. You no longer hope someone will push you. You push yourself because you've seen what you can survive, you've seen what you can grow through, and now you know what you can become. This stage is about taking ownership, not the kind that feels heavy, but the kind that feels empowering. It's the moment you stop running from your potential and start running toward it. You stop saying someday and start saying now. And the beautiful thing is, the moment you take responsibility for your life, the world starts responding differently. Doors open, people show up, ideas spark, clarity arrives. Not because the world changed, but because you did. It's in this stage that you realize responsibility isn't a burden, it's a privilege. The privilege to shape your destiny. The privilege to choose your state, your standards, your story. The privilege to influence your own future. The privilege to stand up and say, "This is who I am becoming, and nothing is going to pull me back into who I used to be." And the truth is, it's not discipline that drives this stage, it's purpose. When you know what your life is moving toward, responsibility doesn't feel like pressure, it feels like alignment. It feels like focus. It feels like stepping into the person you were always meant to be. The person you saw glimpses of when you overcame things you once thought would crush you. In this stage, you stop asking for easy. You ask for growth. You ask for strength. You ask for clarity. You ask for the kind of challenge that reveals what's been sleeping inside you. Because once you've tasted your own potential, you can't go back to the version of you that lived on autopilot. This is the point where you rise not because someone expects it, not because someone inspires it, but because you've decided that the rest of your life deserves the strongest, wisest, most powerful version of you. And that decision changes everything. Because when you take full responsibility for your life, you unlock the life that was waiting for you all along. There comes a moment in life when everything you've learned, everything you've endured, everything you've stepped into and taken responsibility for begins to point you towards something bigger than yourself. It's the stage where success is no longer measured by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. And the beautiful part is, this isn't about grand gestures or having everything figured out. It's about recognizing that the experiences that shaped you weren't meant to end with you. They were meant to flow through you. You start to realize that the challenges you overcame didn't just give you strength, they gave you perspective. The pain you rose out of didn't just make you resilient, it made you compassionate. The breakthroughs you fought for didn't just transform you. They equipped you to help someone else who's standing where you once stood. And suddenly, contribution isn't something you have to force. It becomes something that feels natural, almost necessary, like breathing. This is the stage where you understand that fulfillment doesn't come from getting, it comes from giving. Not because giving makes you look good, but because it makes you feel aligned. Because deep down, every human being has a need to make a difference. And the moment you tap into that part of yourself, life stops being about survival or success alone. It becomes about significance. You begin to sense that your life has weight, and that weight creates impact. What's incredible is that contribution looks different for everyone. For some, it's the way they speak. For others, it's the way they lead. For some, it's the way they show up for their family. For others, it's the way they lift strangers without anyone ever knowing their name. The size of the action doesn't matter. The intention behind it does. When you give from a place of authenticity, even the smallest act can shift someone's entire life. And as you move deeper into this stage, you start noticing something even more powerful. Contribution expands you. It takes the strength you've built, the courage you've earned, the wisdom you've gathered, and multiplies them. The more you give, the more you grow. The more you help, the more capable you become. Contribution becomes the engine of continuous transformation. You stop asking, "What can I get from life?" and start asking, "What can I add to it?" And that question alone unlocks a different level of energy, clarity, and purpose that success by itself could never give you. It makes your journey meaningful. It makes your growth valuable. It makes every step worth it. And what's remarkable is that the moment you start contributing, you attract people, situations, and opportunities that align with the highest version of yourself. Life begins to open in ways you never imagined, not because you demanded more from it, but because you began offering more of yourself to it. This is the stage where you don't just live, you begin to matter. Because your life reaches its fullest expression the moment you choose to use it for something greater than you.